Hello, this is Alex, and I welcome you to Socialism Survival Podcast number 9. Today I will talk about the UN and its socialistic agenda. But first, I'd like to thank you for listening week after week to this show. And now, ladies and gentlemen, let's talk about the United Nations organization and its ties with socialism. Well, not just ties, but much more. You about to learn. The connection is so obvious now for everyone who is willing to open their eyes and look. However, what a shocking discovery it was for me, still Soviet citizen, 20 years ago when I stumbled across my first serious facts for the case against the UN. So let's quickly tour the past and then we'll follow the chain of discoveries up till today. Besides providing additional facts for those who already know the truth about the UN, I hope that some of those who still think in favor of this organization will rethink their position. Here is the story. 20 years ago, I visited one of my friends near Tallinn, Estonian capital. He wanted me to see something he thought I might be interested in. Just recently, he received by mail the set of applications from the UN. Just fill them and mail back, my friend suggested. And in a month, you will receive your new UN international passport. He knew that as traveling musician, I wanted to go beyond Soviet borders, being invited to various European festivals. You need it more. I can wait, he said, willing to donate me his opportunity. Let me examine first what's in these papers, I replied, thanking him at the same time for such a friendly gesture. Having some English knowledge, I was in a better position than my friend, who relied on me to translate for him, because all paperwork was in English. Although I do not remember most of the text, I still recall several things that triggered in me a desire to do my own research, to keep digging for any information that would provide a better understanding of the substance of organization. First, I was alerted by the statement that by signing the application, I will become a citizen of the world. At that time, I wasn't really happy with my Soviet citizenship. And here suddenly I was welcomed in some amorphous world that Soviet Union was part of. Another alarming fact discovered in that papers was the presence in the organization of late Isaac Asimov, an American but Soviet-born science fiction writer who also enjoyed being president of the American Humanist Association and some other suspicious personalities. The names I saw in the letters, in the papers. Remember, I didn't have the computer and internet access at that time, but I've spent countless hours in libraries doing my own research on this and other subjects. I examined many documents and read various books, passed through the underground dissident channels. Among these documents were US Constitution and Declaration of Independence, the Human Rights Declaration, documents from Geneva Convention, Oslo Accord, and so-called Lausanne Committee for World Evangelization, which actually is a mask for New World Evangelism. Some would say, Alex, why you are trying to scare people? I do not scare anyone. The scare will begin the moment you sacrifice your freedom for so-called good of the people or the world unity promised by the organization. And the discoveries about the UN, they are quite frightening. But it's up to you, either you just get scared or will act as an emissary of freedom. Truly, God's people, freedom fighters, must be equipped with the knowledge. And that's what this podcast is for. Let's look at the roots of the United Nations and its underlying purpose of socialist control of the world. Founded in 1945, the United Nations chose the communist spy, Alger Hayes, as its first, though temporary, Secretary General. A Harvard Law School graduate, he served as an advisor to Franklin Roosevelt at the end of World War II, while secretly functioning as a Soviet agent. He's worked with the forerunner to the National Council of Churches to establish a world government that fit the communist vision for socialist control. He didn't stay long in the helm of the organization he had helped found. In 1946, he was elected president of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace and was replaced by Trygve Lie, a Norwegian labor leader, with temporary Gladwin Jeb, known as a member of the Liberal Party, in between them. Trygve Lie had earlier first been nominated to preside over the General Assembly by Andrei Gromyko of the Soviet Union. Oh yes, I remember Andrei Gromyko. He was the most secretive person in the Communist Party. As Secretary General in 1950, he urged that the UN admit the Communist People's Republic of China. But he offended the Soviet Union by supporting military intervention in the Korean War. From then on, he faced its official hindrance and personal insult. Meanwhile, as a result of the McCarthy investigations against suspected communists in the UN, Lie's secretariat was accused of giving jobs to disloyal US citizens. None of the charges were proven, but his authority suffered and he resigned in 1952. Of the 17 individuals identified by the US State Department as having helped shape US policy leading to the creation of the United Nations, all but one were later identified as secret members of the Communist Party USA. The UN Charter and Constitution is a paraphrasing of the Soviet model and is therefore a reflection of Marxist socialism. Let's look at another organization which is in a big connection to UN, the Council on Foreign Relations, or shortly CFR, the organization that influenced the creation of the predecessor of UN, the League of Nations, and then the UN. CFR was founded in 1921 by Edward Mandell House, chief advisor to President Woodrow Wilson, a socialist who wrote in his book that he was working for socialism as dreamed by Karl Marx. Through its membership, meetings, and studies, the Council on Foreign Relations is the most powerful agent of United States foreign policy outside the United States Department. The founders of CFR included many of those who had been at the signing of the Treaty of Versailles after World War I, including Colonel Edward House and Walter Lippmann. Finances for the CFR came from the same players that set up the Federal Reserve System in America: JP Morgan, John D. Rockefeller, and others. Among its current members are Bill Clinton, Colin Powell, Madeleine Albright, George Stephanopoulos, Tom Brokaw, former CIA Director James Woolsey, and other politicians and media elite. If you look Council on Foreign Relations in Wikipedia, you'll find there the list of notable historical members, and some of my Republican friends will be surprised to discover there such names as George H. W. Bush, George W. Bush, wow, and John McCain among them. Wow. Another fact you may find interesting, that the United Nations, 18 acres of prime Manhattan land was donated by the Rockefeller family, and that David Rockefeller was the CFR's chairman from 1970 to 1985. With all this evidence, these two organizations look inseparable for me. After the extensive research, it looks for me like CFR has a lot to do with the US presidential elections outcome. They are playing their pipes and drums, and American people keep dancing. They are orchestrating public emotions to reach their goal. Are you angry? Well, they will have another candidate next time to quench your anger. They just will make sure that is someone who serves their and UN goal for the new world order and the world government. And as you can see, there is nothing but world socialism. To reach that goal, the United Nations bureaucrats are doing everything to fool, to seduce, to rip off people of the world, but especially American people, who are paying 25% of the UN expenses. We are in the midst of a propaganda campaign designed to scare us and encourage us to see things the way the world order sees them. Their position is that since another great depression and financial crisis is almost certain, the nations should move now to organize themselves into a one world economic order to make sure that even though such a calamity may occur, there will be a reconstitution of a meaningful international monetary system. However, not only your money, but your mind and your soul are targeted too. UN spiritual ambassadors are praying to their God in a secret meditation room at the UN, where they receive the spiritual guidance to travel throughout the nations and to catch as many people as possible into the nets of their New Age religion of the New World Order. Thanks to investigative journalist Cliff Kincaid, we have the images and description of the UN meditation room, plus a lot more information about the UN activities and plans. In 1990s, while doing the work of God's ministry in the Ukraine, my attention was caught by advertisement of meditation meetings conducted by the UN Ambassador of Peace, Sharichin Moy, who also performs such meditations for the United Nations staff. That was yet another evidence of the unclean spirit's permanent residence at the UN. Here is what followed my discovery just a few years later. 2 UN Millennium Summits. The Millennium World Peace Summit thought a spiritual foundation for a global ethic of socialist rights and duties. The UN Millennium Summit sought approval for a world government that would manage natural, human, and social resources around the world. As it was stated there, for the first time in history, religious and spiritual leaders from the major religious traditions and from all regions of the world met at the United Nations to pledge themselves to work of peace. They signed this commitment to global peace and resolved to join together to address the pressing problems of conflict, poverty, and the environment. Here is the statement from the commitment. There have been well-meaning and sometimes eloquent calls for world government, calls which pointed to the unfairness, inequality, and injustice of the present distributions of wealth, power, and policy making. If only we could work as one world, then we could solve the world's problems together. And here is introduction to the Charter for Global Democracy, signed at the Millennium Summit. We pledge to move expeditiously to endow the UN with resources, both operational and financial, commensurate to the tasks it faces in its peacekeeping activities worldwide. As permanent members of the Security Council, we will continue to fulfill our obligations under the Charter and commit to making UN organization stronger and more effective. And it was signed by Presidents Clinton of USA, Putin of Russia, Zeming, China, and Chirac, France, and Prime Minister Blair of UK on September 7th, year 2000. These two UN summits fit together. It reminds me Nazi Germany when political success was looking for cooperating churches and compromising spiritual leaders. Soviet communist regime officials manipulated religious leaders who agreed to cooperate with them. Others, unwilling to cooperate and compromise, were persecuted and murdered. Same will happen if or when UN socialism gets total control over religious freedom and begins to dictate who, what, where, and how to worship. Right now, they are setting traps with such welcoming words as diversity, unity, peace, security, tolerance, peacemaking, bridge building, etc. But with these words in their context, the United Nations reminds me a prostitute described in Proverbs chapter 7, who seduces young men. The verse 21 says, with her much fair speech, she caused him to yield. With the flattering of her lips, she forced him. And that young man went after her. Continues in verses 22-23. As an ox goes to the slaughter, or as a fool to the correction of the stocks, till a dart strike through his liver. Same will happen to those believers who compromise, being seduced by the empty speeches of the UN prostitute. Listen to the word of God. Same chapter, verse 25-27. Let not thine heart decline to her ways. Go not astray in her path. For she hath cast down many wounded. Yea, many strong men have been slain by her. Her house is the way to hell, going down to the chambers of death. UN is the socialistic stronghold of lies and deceptions. Most of the UN Secretary Generals and General Assembly presidents were socialists and communists, and it continues today. Previous president, which was president of the 63rd session of the UN General Assembly, Miguel de Escoto. He was a UN hitman on global governance issues. He is the former foreign minister of communist Sandinista Nicaragua and Catholic priest of the Marinol order, who advocates Marxist-oriented liberation theology. And he won the Lenin Peace Prize from the old Soviet Union. What the honor. Current 64th General Assembly President Ali Abdusalam Treki is not the gift to the United World either, as he was a special advisor to Libyan leader Muammar al-Gaddafi, who calls his regime Islamic socialism. I know there are many defenders of the UN, even among Christians and Jews. Some would say, look, Alex, the United Nations fulfilled or helped to fulfill biblical prophecy in the restoration of Israel. That statement has a lot of deception in it. First, as for me, it's the fact that the UN members, including Soviet Union, voted for the creation of Israel, well, and Palestine too, simply because they envisioned another socialist state in the Middle East. And for many years, there were portraits of Lenin and Stalin in Israel, in Israel's collective farms called kibbutzim. Second, Israel, with all these resolutions, got only 20% of the promised land. Well, about that. Being cheated by one of the members of UN, British mandate. And yes, God once used even a pagan prophet, Balaam, to bless Israel. But God also used donkey to correct the same man. So he didn't like that, but he understood. Maybe you don't like this message. Listen. Maybe you need to listen like Balaam. Listen to donkey. But the truth is the truth, no matter how sweet are their words in your ears. Maybe so sweet you want to cry. But I repeat, the truth is the truth. The United Nations and its socialistic new world order is the way to hell. But there is the way from the UN tyranny to freedom, as it is written. You shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. Before I turn off my microphone, here is my Russian joke of the week. Residents of one remote island got the news that they were granted UN membership. During celebrations, their leader rejoiced so much that he fell from the tree and broke his tail. I'd like to thank all websites, blogs, and different resources that were so helpful for me in my research and in preparation of this podcast. I don't have a time to name all of them right here, but if you will visit my Socialism Survival blog, you'll find there show notes of this podcast. And I will put all links that I used in the show notes of this podcast number 9. Thank you for listening to Socialism Survival podcast. Till next week, God bless you and keep you. Keep you right here. Not in so-called United World, but in a blessed United States of America.